Today I'm joined by Dr. Chris Aiken, author of Bipolar, Not So Much, and host of the Carlat Psychiatry podcast. We discuss depression, bipolar disorder, mixed states, and other challenges along the mood spectrum. Dr. Aiken shares science and practical tools to help you understand and improve your mood and brain health. We explore sleep, light and darkness, nutrition, supplements, drugs, and more. This is an action-packed mood masterclass with Dr. Chris Aiken. In your book, Bipolar, Not So Much, you really beautifully and clearly presented this framework, this spectrum for understanding mood disorders, mood in general. On one extreme, bipolar disorder with manic symptoms, and on the other side, clinical depression, and then everything in between. Today, we're going to talk about how we can improve our mood with or without medications or drugs. But first, I want to kind of understand or help the audience understand this whole mood spectrum that you've very clearly outlined in your book.
Yeah, so to understand that, you need to know a little history, actually. And the word manic depression, before 1980, that word meant that you were either depressed a lot or you got manic and depressed. So what we think of today as bipolar, that's the word that came out in 1980 to replace it, is really people with full manias. They might need to go to the hospital for them. They're not acting like themselves. They do things that are totally out of character and have really irreversible repercussions on their lives, things that would cost them to lose their job or their relationships. That's what mania is. So it's really an extreme state. And that's how we've come to use the word bipolar now. But what I'm saying is before 1980, we just recognized that there was a big spectrum of mood problems where people had a little bit of manic symptoms, a lot of depressed symptoms. They had all gradients of these two. And it was seen as one disorder. So just like a coin has two sides, you wouldn't talk about, well, I'm only interested in the face side of the penny. You're interested in both sides. So really bringing them together is called a unitary way of thinking about them, or a spectrum way of thinking about them. And, these debates about where do you draw the line between the bipolar side with more mania and the depressed side, these go way back. The doctor who discovered it originally, who discovered manic depression, Emil Kraepelin, about 120 years ago, he spent his whole career trying to find a dividing line. And at the end, he said he couldn't arrive at a satisfactory place because there's so much overlap. So for your audience, if you're someone who's suffered from a lot of recurrent, repeated depressions, going through depression every year or so in your life, if a doctor were to take a close look, they'd probably find some small manic features that might be an anxious energy, not sleeping much, racing thoughts, restless and hyperactive, along with those depressed. And we really think of depressed as meaning slowed down. It's not necessarily sad, but slowed down, unmotivated, not doing things, not moving, not thinking as much, not moving as much.
Okay, so we have these two poles. One pole, sort of high energy, maybe fast, maybe kind of hot. I don't know. Maybe I'm bringing in too many metaphors, but these might be more than metaphors. And that sort of mania, perhaps it goes into psychosis at some point. And then on the other side is depression, which is the opposite. It's like this low energy. It's slow. It's cold by metaphor or not. Yeah, can you like a little bit more flesh out these two extremes of what they're like, and then I don't know. It's hard to imagine what's the in between, but maybe you can explain that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, you put it very well. And it is hard to imagine because the in between is really, if we think of them, one is yellow and one is blue. Well, that is hard to imagine. You know that yellow and blue make green, but if you've never seen green, I couldn't describe it to you by saying, just imagine yellow and blue and just overlap them in your mind. So the in-between is called a mixed state where the two are mixed together. And about 1 in 4 people with depression have mixed states in their life. So that's a lot of people. Now, what it looks like, it's depression with a little more. In fact, most people who have mixed states just feel like it's a much worse depression. So they feel depressed but also agitated, depressed and anxious, depressed and irritable, depressed and with a restless energy, but it's directionless. It's like they're driven to do something, but they don't know what to do. And there's a lot of physical symptoms that go along with it. It's like their body's being pulled apart by these two opposing forces of manic and depressed, hot and cold. So they get more muscle soreness and stomach problems and headaches. And their sleep is just all over the place. They'll have times where they don't sleep, times where they do sleep, all over the place there.
Yeah, so each person has a different kind of I want to say bouncing around between these states, but it's not. It's more this cycling or shifting or something. But some people go from mania to depression, and they have both. And there's always a degree of how extreme is each. Some people don't get the mania; they only get the depression, and some people maybe get both plus a mixed state, or maybe some people only get mixed states. I don't know.
Yeah, you put it very well. I think of mixed states as almost like, well, like it's all shaken up. And in fact, some of the risk factors for mixed states are shaken up, like a head injury, or if you think of anything that harms the brain. So the big risk factors are trauma, head injury, and substance use. Like people who've used a lot of cocaine or alcohol are going to be more prone to mixed states. So it's almost like the person has the genes for bipolar, but it's coming out in a more mixed way because they've had some other traumas along the way to their brain.
Yeah, I'm drinking some coffee right now, and that kind of makes me think a way maybe for some people to understand this to a small degree is like you're really correct me if I'm wrong. I might be completely wrong, and it's going to be a much more extreme version of this, but like it's a little taster, if we can imagine. Maybe it's like you're really tired, but you drink all this coffee, or you're all stressed out, and then you drink this alcohol, so you're kind of like tired, but you're also kind of amped up, and you feel kind of gross, kind of grungy, but like you said, you want to sleep, but you can't go to sleep. That kind of feeling is a weird double-edged thing.
Yeah, and you're irritable. That's a great way. I think that really captures it. The most common thing patients will say in a mixed state is tired and wired.
So I guess we want to, yeah, understand what all these things are, and I guess people can reflect on their own, behavior and their mood and stuff, and realize, okay, well, how is my system? There are probably ways to diagnose this and figure it out, but yeah, for people listening, okay. But we want to get into some kind of solutions. The standard approaches are medication. So maybe let's like briefly touch on that. I don't know if all the doctors recognize this spectrum thing that you're explaining, because I imagine if this is true, which it seems to be, then you would treat the people differently depending on where they lie on the spectrum and where they ever exist on the spectrum. Say if someone is depressed, obviously it's going to be different treatment than if they have mania. And then if they have mixed states, I don't know what to do with that. Maybe you could explain the standard approach and maybe some of the risks if you maybe prescribe the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, going back to history, in 1980, that was kind of the early days of psychopharmacology. And I would say they tried to oversimplify it. They tried to say, well, there are people who are just bipolar and people who are depressed, but not at all bipolar. And we give them antidepressants. And we give the people with bipolar, we give them lithium and mood stabilizers. And that's simple and that's split in half. And we've done our scientific job. Well, as soon as they put that book out in 1980, the DSM, papers started coming in arguing that this was a premature separation. And to his credit, one of the doctors that helped devise the split, Jules Angst, he actually helped put it back together. He spent the rest of his career researching those middle people, like you said, who have features of both. And that's a lot of people. I'd say about 30 or 40% of people with depression are in the middle of the two extremes. Now, in terms of doctors recognizing it, they should be, because the new DSM, which was 2013, pretty much recognized all these different features. They recognize that you can have mixed features and not have bipolar. For example, the author of the new DSM said that mood disorders are variable expressions of mania and depression, depending on your vulnerability to the two. It's kind of a unitary spectrum between the two. Anyway, so we are supposed to recognize them more now. I hope that we are. If you feel like this speaks to you and you feel like you're not being recognized by them, A good resource is just Google the mood disorder questionnaire or the hypomanic checklist 32. These are common rating scales that allow you to identify symptoms that are often missed. And they are often missed because this mixed manic side is going to be a smaller percentage of your life cycle. So you might spend a good 5 to 10 times as much days in the depressed side than the mixed manic side. So a lot big difference there in time. But they do inform treatment, like you said. Now, it still remains true that if you're on the very manic side, we use mood stabilizers and we avoid antidepressants because antidepressants can cause mania. They can make mood cycle more, where you cycle in and out of mania or in and out of depression. So you could start an antidepressant and just get out of it real quickly because you cycled out of it and then start to have more cycles of depression. That's called rapid cycling. It's another risk. And that risk is more, the more manic features you have, the more that risk is true. Now, on the other side, if we take people who just have depression and no manic or mixed features, they'll do well with antidepressants and they have a very low chance of feeling worse on them. But if you're someone who's ever felt mentally worse, not side effects, but like more depressed or more anxious or agitated on an antidepressant, then you'd want to think about these other mixed and manic features. And we don't exactly know what to do for mixed features. We know that antidepressants sometimes help, sometimes make it worse. It's all kind of a mixed bag. So we're still developing the science of what to do, as we've only started to recognize them more in the last 10 years. Generally, people are using a lot of antipsychotics and lithium and lamotrigine, but we don't yet know what the best answer for them is. So if you do have mixed features, I tend to, as a doctor, just follow you really closely and be really careful because we're not as sure about what we're doing.
Um, ADHD seems to sometimes be comorbid with this. The causes and symptoms seem to be overlapping sometimes. And I know on your podcast, the Carlet Psychiatry podcast, you have done some episodes on ADHD. So where does ADHD fit into all of this?
Yeah, so ADHD it's the word we use most often to describe cognitive problems, but there are many causes of cognitive problems. If you have recurrent depression or bipolar disorder, you've got right there, just there, a 30 to 60% chance of having continued cognitive difficulties, even when you're not in a mood episode, even when you're so-called recovered, your brain is still not working all the way. So you might think that you have ADHD. So it's a bit of an overused word to describe all kinds of cognitive problems. That one of my favorite studies, they were in a just adult treatment center, and they found the most common cause of presentation for ADHD in adults, where it just started in adulthood, was sleep deprivation. So there you go. That's going to be a big cause. But to speak to that, I did say, starts in adulthood, which is not how ADHD works. So ADHD is a cognitive problem that begins in your early years. It's called neurodevelopmental, which means it's pretty much there from preschool days. It may not show up all the way until you really get into school, but you're going to be inattentive, distractive, have trouble focusing and prioritizing. So like any given moment of the day, there's something to put your attention on. And if you're lucky, your brain just magnetically falls there. But if you have ADHD, it tends to fall to the back burner, to places that you shouldn't be paying attention to. Distracted. But distracted also means you're not getting your to-do list done because you're constantly getting your priorities wrong. And you're not getting your life together, because life is all about priorities. Like, I'm 20, how am I going to live my life now? I'm 25, I'm 30, what am I going to do? What's going to be meaningful to me? So big picture priorities as well, they all go to the waste in ADHD. And that's really sad, because life starts to stack up with troubles, which can make you depressed. So a lot of people with ADHD have depression. It's different from the kind of mood spectrum depression I'm talking about. One difference is there's fewer physical symptoms in those cases. But on the other side, people with bipolar, let's say, can have ADHD. They can have the genes for ADHD. We'd know it if it's in their family history, if it showed up early in their early years instead of suddenly coming in adulthood. About 1 in 10 or 1 in 7 people with bipolar have ADHD. But then there's a lot of people, as you alluded to, who have mood problems, and the mood symptoms themselves make them feel like they have ADHD. Because if you look at the criteria for mood disorders, it includes things like impulsive, hyperactive, distracted, racing thoughts. These all sound a lot like ADHD.
Yeah. And there are lots of genes that do contribute to bipolar disorder and perhaps ADHD too, as you alluded to. But it's not just these genes, it's these environmental factors and lifestyle things that kind of trigger it off, it seems. And from reading your book and listening to you talk now, it seems like circadian rhythms, sleep, this combines with like light and dark and lots of factors, movement. Basically, circadian rhythms in general seem to be a big component. So let's talk about that because aside from medication, and maybe before medication, this might be the biggest piece to sort of handle first. But it's a very difficult piece. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So circadian rhythms are very basic. We share those with ancient organisms at the bottom of the sea. In fact, we share the same receptors for light and some of the same genes for the biological clock, another word for circadian rhythm, as those organisms do. So this is very ancient. And you brought out that it's a key part of bipolar, and that's true. The closest thing we've come to finding the genes for bipolar are the circadian rhythm genes. In fact, lithium, one of our most effective medicines for bipolar, corrects those genes. It kind of like reprograms the clock, which is really neat. But I'll also say that, like those ancient organisms, circadian rhythms are important to all of us. It's just in bipolar, it's kind of an accentuated, so important that I call people, I don't use the word bipolar, I say fragile circadian rhythm disorder, because that's really what it is. If you have bipolar, you cannot handle those changes in seasons or changes in time zones if you fly to Australia, or changes in your daily routines and daily life. You need a rhythm to keep your mood stable. Changes in sleep, you can't handle that as much. And really what all these changes boil down to is changes in hormones. And for many years, patients would come to me when I was a younger doctor and say, I know what's really wrong with me. It's my hormones. And doctors are always skeptical of that because we thought of these as mental illnesses. But, actually, the patients were right, because the circadian rhythm, the biological clock, is run by hormones. And they're all keeping a chronologic time throughout the day as they rise and fall. Now imagine you go on that first date and you have that flush of love. Imagine that you go into your boss's office and she just lays into you and criticizes you. These are events, good and bad, that you feel it in your body, right? You feel that flush of love and you feel it in your heart. And likewise, when you're afraid, you feel that same kind of feeling. Those feelings that you're feeling in your body are your neurohormones circulating up and down in response to life. And those two events that I just described, getting yelled at by your boss or going on a first date, could be very disruptive for a person with bipolar because they'll disrupt their sleep cycle, their circadian rhythm, etc. And then they might get into a mood episode. Well, that gives you a bit about what is behind the scenes here. And we can talk more about how all of us, bipolar or not, can improve our mental health by altering our circadian rhythms. Yeah.
yeah. Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's talk about what we can do. Yeah, especially what people with bipolar can do. But yeah, these are going to be the same things that any of us can do. But there's probably going to be more important and have a bigger impact, negatively or positively, for people on certain parts of this mood spectrum, specifically. Yeah, bipolar.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start with simple things we all can do, bipolar or not, and then I'll throw in a few that are a little more extreme for maybe just people with mood disorders. I ended up doing all these things, everything in my book I did it just to write the book and kind of also take care of my patients, to know what I'm recommending to them, to know how to do it. But then I couldn't stop doing it, because if I stop and get off schedule or get onto more processed foods, because diet is a part of it too, I feel so bad. I don't have some wasted days. So I stick with it. And here's how it looks: is you first think about the bookends of your day. That's morning and night, light and darkness. And you try to get those at a regular time. Here we found out that the brain runs on island time. If you ever heard of island time, that's like give or take 15 minutes. And it's interesting. The brain can totally give or take 15 minutes and it does not care. So you don't have to be perfect. Maybe even 30 minutes is fine. So we're going to say get up and get out of bed at the same time each day, and get bright light at the same time each day in the morning, give or take 15 or 30 minutes. And what does getting up mean? Because you might get up, wash your hands, go back to bed, sit up, get down, go to sleep, wake up, get down again. Well, it gets kind of difficult if you don't have a regular rhythm. So the definition of getting up is when you stand up, because that's when noradrenaline, norepinephrine starts pumping to squeeze your blood vessels together so that you don't pool your blood and faint. That's how you stand up. Anyone who stood up and fainted knows what I'm talking about. It doesn't always work right. So we're going to time your day by when you first get up and stand up and expose yourself to light. Hopefully you open the curtains and get that bright sunlight, or you can use like a dawn simulator. That's a device that slowly turns on a sunrise in your bedroom. They cost around $50 to $100. And there's studies showing they treat depression. So I start my day with a dawn simulator. I have automatic curtains that rise early in the morning, so I get that sunrise as well.
I've got a list of all these different things we could do to help with these bipolar symptoms, and things like diet, exercise, light, sleep. But now, as you're talking, it makes me realize, oh, these are all connected. These are ways to improve our circadian rhythms, essentially. And what all these things are doing are they are sort of tuning our clock, it seems. So, yeah, maybe you could talk about how these things. You've mentioned light and dark, but I want to dig deeper into that, because it's not just like getting that morning sunlight and keeping things dark at night. It's all the flashes and stuff in between, the headlights from the cars, the things on your phone. It's just like people with bipolar disorder are more sensitive to these seemingly subtle little changes in light and dark. So, what are some extra things we can do to handle that? I know you've talked about wearing these blue light blocker glasses. There's dark therapy. Let's dig into this light and dark thing.
Yeah, let's get into the evening. So light is good in the morning, especially blue wavelength light. That's the more high energy light. You want that bright whitish, bluish light in the morning. And I want to say that it can sound like I'm just saying what your grandmother told you or what Dr. Huberman told you. And it's like, we've all heard this. Yeah, yeah. But I want to speak to how powerful it is that there's a popular medication called Provigil or Nuvigil, modafinil. And people take it as a stimulating effect. It's actually a controlled substance. Powerful stuff, right? And one thing it does is it promotes wakefulness in the brain. Well, the effect on morning wakefulness with Provigil is statistically identical to the effect of a dawn simulator. So you can go the natural route. And I'm just saying that to say that natural is not light, like light is in thin and weak. If you change your diet, avoid processed foods and avoid simple sugars, salt, fats, and cholesterol and fast foods. If you shift to a Mediterranean style diet with whole grains and vegetables and lean meats and nuts and extra virgin olive oil. So that's a big shift for the diet. If you just do that, that's going to have as powerful an effect on your mood as an antidepressant. So these are big shifts in the brain and body. And people always look at me like, oh, come on, how could that be? And I'm like, well, we had 500,000 years of evolution to align our biology with these forces, with what we eat. Food is the most natural way to deliver medicine. That's how it comes in the body. And the food we eat, if we eat the right foods, it has medicines in it, like probiotics, the mind gut connection. These have a big effect on mood. And flavanols are ingredients like in blueberries that have been found to treat depression on their own. So if we talk about one food during the day to eat that is going to lift your mood the most, blueberries probably have the most research, and then nuts. So that's just to speak how powerful it is. And now if you want to get into the darkness, let's talk about the opposite of darkness. Let's talk about light pollution. And in particular, since like the 1990s, we've shifted toward fluorescent lights that have a lot of blue in them. They look white. The bright white lights have a lot of blue light in them. And blue light is what tells your brain that it's morning. So it sets the circadian rhythm in the morning zone. And we've shifted towards iPhones close to our face and big screen LEDs a little further from our face. All of those are emitting a lot of blue light. This has become such an issue that the American Medical Association has put out warning statements about it. Psychiatry hasn't really caught up to that yet, but what are they worried about? They're worried about heart disease, diabetes, cancer risk, all of that going up with blue light at night. What are psychiatrists worried about? We're worried about lighter sleep, poorer, worse concentration the next day, and more depression and bipolar with more evening light exposure, particularly blue light. So let's get back to nature. Go back 500 years. What type of light did you have at night, if any? You had starlight, candlelight, maybe a fire. It's all yellow. So let's shift to orangey yellow light at night. And that's what dark therapy does. You mentioned dark therapy. That is a powerful treatment for mania. The statistical effect of dark therapy was as effective as any medication we know, and it worked within a week. So it can treat mania. In those studies, they did it in addition to medication, so it was added on. We don't know if it works on its own, but I would use it as a first-line intervention if a patient called me with some mild manic symptoms and they knew themselves well and they knew that mixed state or mania was creeping up on them. The first thing I'd do is let's put on those blue light filtering glasses, and those filter out all the blue light at night at 6 p.m. Now, why 6 p.m.? Because that is what they did in the research, but that is replicating a dark winter night. Let's get back to nature. What is the darkest day that you might experience in natural evolution of human race? Would be the sun going down at 6 p.m. That would be a dark day. We don't want to put those blue light filtering glasses on at 1 p.m. We don't want the sun to set too early, or we're going to really crash our circadian rhythm the opposite way. Likewise, if we're going to use light therapy, like the dawn simulator, we don't want to use that at night. That could do the reverse. So we talked about how a person with bipolar might use more extreme methods to correct their circadian rhythm. And indeed, big, bright light boxes can be used in the morning, and they're more effective than these dawn simulators. They are about, the research varies, but about equal or sometimes double the benefit of an antidepressant. So pretty powerful using a light box early in the morning if you have depression, bipolar or not. Now, shifting to the evening, if you have bipolar and you're getting manic, I'm going to recommend those blue light filtering glasses at 6 p.m. And then all night long, you either wear those glasses or you sleep in a pitch dark room. So there's no bluish, whitish light at all. If you don't have bipolar and you just want to get this benefit, you don't have to go that extreme. I'd recommend wearing the glasses about 2 hours before bed. There are studies done in insomnia like that. And the people with insomnia, they sleep deeper, they focus better. But what's interesting is they don't focus better that night. I wear these glasses. They're orange tinted, think fireside, firelight. And all of a sudden I'm kind of mellow and I don't feel driven to have to do everything, like do the dishes and fold the laundry and do all my work. I don't feel so work driven. I feel a little mellow out, the way you might feel if you went to a mountain cabin and it's fireside and firelight and really peaceful. So I peace out and then I fall asleep. So I'm actually not concentrating great when I'm wearing them. I mean, I'm not like super sharp. And that's been proven that if you take an IQ test, you're not going to do as well with the yellow glasses on. But the next day, I'm much more sharper. I do my work better. My frustration tolerance is much better. I'm less irritable. So I feel similar kind of benefits as a person with bipolar would, sleeping in pitch darkness and wearing these blue light glasses at night.
How do seasons affect this, and what can people do during these seasonal changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see a lot of, remind me, you're in Japan, is that right?
I'm in Japan. Yeah, we don't have daylight savings here. Thank God. I like it this way.
Yeah, so daylight savings affects it. If the government sets the clock a bit more out of sync with nature, then we see higher rates of depression. In our country, in the US, particularly in the winter, they start the daylight savings. Actually, it brings a little more morning sunlight when they shift to daylight savings. So all of a sudden, instead of the sun going up at about 7 or 8, it's going up at 6 or 7. And it's really that early light that matters. So what we see in the winter is there's less light, and there is winter depression. That's a well-known phenomena. But it's less light, but what really seems to matter is there's less light in the morning. And then if we switch to springtime, we see much higher rates of mania in the springtime and other stuff. If you work for the police, you're going to see more violence in the spring. There's going to be higher suicide rates in the spring. People think suicide happens more likely around Christmas and the holidays, but that's actually not true. Statistically, it's the spring. And the reason seems to be that there's a sudden increase in sunlight. In parts of the world like Arizona, where they have really sharp increases in sunlight, they have higher rates of mania around that time. It's interesting because, in the summer, if you want to talk about the most sunlight, it's actually July. It's actually late June and early July when we have the most sunlight. But we're not seeing a lot of mania around then because by that time you're kind of acclimatized to it and you're used to it. It's the sudden change. And that's what I meant when I said fragile circadian rhythm. People with bipolar are prone to sudden changes in their daily biological clock, whether it's springtime or flying to Australia from the US instead of taking a ship, a boat. If you travel by boat, you're going to gradually adjust to the time zone and it's not as sudden. So Lightbox does treat seasonal depression, but I want to warn people that most of the boxes out there don't have the right specs. The simple truth is the prettier the box is, the less likely it is to work because the ones that work medically, they're kind of bulky and ugly. They're not so attractive. But if you're interested in this kind of thing, it is important to get the right product, particularly with the light box and the glasses, because also the glasses that work, that filter out the blue light, they're going to be a little darker. They're not going to be as pretty. So I see a lot out there that are kind of a light yellow, and they might reduce some blue light, but not enough. You need close to 100%. And if you're interested in that, my website, chrisaikenmd.com, and it has links to lifestyle stuff on that main page. You're going to easily find the dark therapy and the light therapy, and I keep the products up to date there.
I've been reading quite a few autobiographies from people with bipolar disorder and interviewing some of them. And one, now that you're talking about that, something just sparked in my head. A lot of times, manic episodes coincide with some like overseas travel, entering different time zones. Their sleep is getting messed up. And also thinking about like my family. I have a brother with bipolar disorder. We went on a trip to Hawaii and he was getting a bit manic. Even I get somewhere closer on towards that side of the spectrum when I travel overseas. So yeah, maybe we could talk about that a little bit. Travel, shifting time zones. You did talk about it. Jet lag is part of this, but it's a sudden shift when we, fly across the world and suddenly wake into a new world of light or dark.
Yes, and they have done enough research that we know how many time zones matter. So it's flying over 2 or more time zones that are likely to affect your mood. Otherwise, like I said, the brain is still fairly flexible. For 1 hour difference is okay. You know, it's interesting that this is so closely linked to new mood episodes. You're absolutely right. And it does show us, by the way, that mania and depression are linked because time zone shifts are it's almost like you're flipping a coin. It could make you manic or it could make you depressed. There's a little more chance of getting depressed if you're flying west. So if you're heading west, west is depressed is the rhyme. But this is still kind of a coin toss because these are very connected in their biology, these two mental states, mania and depression. So we don't know exactly what to do. Not a lot of research there, but what I would take is the common sense approach, which is to travel by ship, right? And so how do you travel by ship if you're traveling by plane? Well, you pretend and you gradually adjust the exposure to light and darkness in your sleep schedule. Now, literally the way to do that is very simple. A nice sleep doctor created this website and then someone else bought it. But his website was called Jetlag Rooster, LAG for lag and rooster like the chicken. And if you Google Jetlag Rooster, it'll show up the new version of the website and you enter your dates of travel, where you're traveling to, and it'll tell you how to adjust your sleep and your exposure to light and darkness a week before or a week after so you can adjust to the time zone better. I think it's core essential reading if you have bipolar. And if you don't have bipolar, it's just going to make your life go a little easier as you travel.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about blueberries and flavonols and some other foods we can eat to improve our symptoms. Maybe you could talk about some other ones. Specifically, I do want to talk about omega 3s and fish because those do have a profound impact on my mood positively. But also some things that can bring us the other direction that can make things worse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So and I'll say, if you're interested in this, the diet is on my website, chrisaikenmd.com/antidepressant diet. I called it that because it's as powerful as an antidepressant. And there's no calorie restrictions. You can eat as much as you want. You just eat more of this. That's fish, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and extra virgin olive oil, which is healthier than regular olive oil. It turns out has more antioxidants in it. So eat more of that. And then in the middle is stuff that you eat some of because they do some good, they do some harm. So what do? Like eggs. If you Google eggs, half the websites that come up, Google eggs and health, are going to say eggs are bad for your health. Half are going to say eggs are good for your health. So what's the person to do? Well, this has an easy solution: is you eat them in moderation. So you eat no more than 6 eggs a week. Eggs do have ingredients like choline, which prevent mood disorders and schizophrenia. So they're very important for the brain. Eggs you eat in moderation. Lean meat, so that's chicken and red meat, you eat in moderation, but like 1 serving a day of lean meat. It's not severe moderation. Eggs, meat, and dairy are, I believe, the 3 that we're eating in moderation there. I apologize, I might be missing one. And then there's the things you eat less of, which are things that are known to harm the brain. So they just lumped all these together and advised people to eat no more than like 2 servings of these a week. And they are processed foods, fast foods, sugary foods, white bread like pastries and any kind of white bread, as opposed to whole grains. And now I remember whole grains was the other thing to eat more of. Whole grains, 100% whole grains. So it's a little tricky there because a lot of products try to pass themselves off as whole grains, like they say made with whole grains, and all they've done is sprinkle a few whole grains in it. There's not enough to make a difference. You want 100% whole grains. Eat more of that and eat less of the white breads. So again, salty, fried, fast food, processed food, sugary food, white bread food, you want to stay away from that and minimize that. And we see that stuff causes inflammation in the brain, and the opposite of what we want to see, which what we want to see is neuroprotection. We want foods that when you eat them, the brain cells are healthier and stronger. That's called neuroprotection. And the foods that I mentioned, they're packed with these flavonols and antioxidants and vitamins that are essential for brain development. And like you said, omega 3, that's in fish. It's also in nuts and a lot of fruits and vegetables. Omega 3 coats the brain cells. Now, this whole subject of food and the brain, I can tell you what to eat. If we get into why you have to eat those things to help your brain, it's quite a long discussion. But I think we can really just give people a great picture with omega 3, because this is one rare instance in psychiatry where the biochemical description actually makes perfect sense with your experience. And here it goes. So the brain is developed from the same cells that develop the skin in the embryo. Same cells turn into skin as brain, that they're like linked together. So when you look at your skin, you're kind of looking at your brain in a way. And what do we know about skin? Well, it's leather, right? So leather is skin, animal skin. And if you have a nice leather seat, you're going to do what to it so it doesn't crack and get brittle? You're going to oil it every couple months, keep it oiled. Otherwise, what happens. It's going to be dried up and cracked and brittle. What is a person like if their brain is cracked and brittle? They're inflexible. They're irritable. They can't see other perspectives. They can't shift and adapt flexibly with life. So they get depressed and irritable. That is exactly what every study of omega 3 shows, whether they studied them in rebellious teenagers or elderly Thai men or prisoners or married couples. Yes, there are studies of married couples and they do have fewer fights if they're taking omega-3s. So they've studied them all over the place, including bipolar and depression. Well, what do we see when we look at their brains? Exactly what you might have guessed from my description is their brain cells are actually more flexible and supple, like a well-oiled leather chair, as opposed to crackly on the brain membrane. And why are they not so healthy if you don't get the omega-3? Because the brain is going to substitute cheaper ingredients that it has available, which is generally cholesterol. So you're stacking cholesterol into those brain cell membranes instead of the omega-3s that it needs, and your brain cells aren't as working as well. That's the bottom line there. I'm glad you brought that up because it's also one area where you need some specialized guidance to get the right products. They've discovered that most products on the shelf, omega-3 pills, don't have the right ingredients to treat depression. They need to have a lot of the EPA and less of the DHA. It's kind of complicated, but if you go that route, my website, chrisaikenmd.com/supplements, has links to good products that were tested by laboratories to have the right ingredients.
How does this tie in with, say, Chris Palmer's brain energy theory, explaining things like bipolar and depression as these metabolic disorders? We have talked about the circadian aspect of all of this, and I guess metabolism and circadian rhythms are all linked up. And you've already kind of hinted at it, but how would you explain or disagree or agree with this whole brain energy theory from Chris Palmer?
So I just laid out, one little aspect of bipolar, which is your brain cell membranes being flexible and well oiled. That's all true. But we could talk about 24 different well established theories, circadian rhythm, inflammation, neurotransmitters that underlie the causes of bipolar. So there's probably many causes. And it's kind of weird and interesting that all these causes sort of present with the same symptoms pretty much. So a doctor can't tell by the symptoms what the cause of your bipolar is. Getting into Chris Palmer's theory, I'm not very well versed in that, but he helped develop the ketogenic diet, which is being studied for bipolar. If anyone's following the ketogenic diet, I'll just advise that the family that founded Roblox, that very successful video game, they have thankfully poured a lot of their money into research to see if the ketogenic diet works, because it worked very well for their son's bipolar condition. So we don't know if it works yet. We don't know if it's just a few people that get better or if a lot of people get better with it. We'll see. The studies are going to come out, and that's very exciting. But part tangentially, what relates to Chris Palmer's theory is a well-established theory of bipolar called the mitochondrial dysfunction. And this theory is, again, like so intuitive common sense that I almost didn't believe it when it came out. I was like, come on. The mitochondria is the energy store in the body. And bipolar is an illness of high and low energy. So you're really telling me that it's due to mitochondrial dysfunction? Can it really be that simple? I was skeptical. But indeed, the mitochondria, there is a lot of dysfunction in bipolar. And so far, they've tested about a dozen therapies that correct the mitochondria, that improve its functioning. And I think only 2 of them actually worked. So, the theory doesn't all line up with the evidence. One of the ones that worked is coenzyme Q10. And I think the other one in this particular paper I'm thinking of was N-acetylcysteine. So these are some supplements that indeed have some benefit from bipolar depression, and they do correct mitochondrial function. So that's another brain energy or energy storehouse theory. Oh, there's also the mind-gut, the probiotic connection. The gut is connected to the brain through the vagus nerve and through other signals like cytokines and metabolic hormones that transmit information between the brain and the gut. And the idea is that if you're eating unhealthy foods and you're feeding the wrong microbiome, then you're going to feed all these inflammatory bacteria that mess up these connections and cause depression, sleep problems, anxiety, and concentration problems. Now, that research is really looking pretty aligned in that it's all theoretical, but the final proof in the pudding, the final test, is if we give people the healthier diet and the healthier probiotics, that's the microbiome, the gut bacteria, is it actually going to improve their mood? And yeah, there's about 30 or so studies of this, and most of them align positive. It seems that taking probiotics improves depression in everyday people who don't have clinical depression, as well as in people with bipolar or depression.
What are some supplements that can help, and maybe some that can make things worse? And I know this is probably going to depend on where you lie on the spectrum and where, if it's a mixed state or you've got depression or you've got full blown bipolar disorder. But yeah, what are some? You mentioned a few of them, and a couple I want to throw in. You can take them or leave them because I have good experience with these, but some people might have bad experience with these. Namely, rhodiola rosea and ashwagandha. Those are two that I'm kind of trying to figure out what are these things. Are these good for me or what are they doing? But you can discard those and talk about others as well.
So when it comes to supplements, we have a lot of research on supplements, and on my website, I've listed the ones that have evidence to work. And it's like, how do you choose from them, Dr. Aiken? Because there's like 24 on here. We got SAM-E for depression. I got rhodiola rosea on there. Resveratrol, which is like a ingredient in the grape skin, the red wine. PEA is exciting. Omega-3 fatty acids, NAC, methylfolate, all these things. Well, first I would start by dividing them into things that are already part of your body or your diet. So even if you don't take them, you're already getting them in your system. They're not foreign to you. You might just be taking a bit more in the supplement. And I would regard those as a bit safer. And then you got ones that are not really part of our diet, like, yeah, I've been to coffee shops where they put some lavender oil in the coffee and it tastes kind of funky, but generally we're not eating lavender, right? Do we all agree? Okay. So those are the ones that I would call herbs. And this gets confusing because some herbs we do eat a lot of, like curcumin, ginger. I mean, we all eat a lot of curcumin, that's turmeric and ginger. So back to your question, I think you said ashwagandha and rhodiola rosacea. These are both herbs. So I would just view herbs more like I would view medicines. And in fact, many medicines are derived from herbs. I think most people know that. I want to mention a few that you may not know about. One of the most popular mood stabilizers in bipolar, valproic acid, Depakote, valproate, is derived from a plant that monks used, and it was known to help the nerves. So it was known for hundreds of years, and they turned it into this medicine. And one of our most popular antidepressants, bupropion, Wellbutrin, was derived from an African khat plant that is used in parts of Africa. They chew it to improve their energy and alertness, just like the same reasons we take Wellbutrin. So when we think about medicines, we think about more risks. And with herbs, I would think about more risks. When it comes to the two herbs that you mentioned, well, rhodiola, I'm not really aware of risks with rhodiola rosea. I used to recommend the other one, ashwagandha, more because it seemed to help concentration and focus, which is really important for bipolar, and it helped with stress reduction and anxiety. But there's been a flare of liver damage recently that's alerted people with these products, the ashwagandha. So I'm taking a step back from that one. On my website, I've only linked to a particular form of ashwagandha called sensoril, which is supposed to be safer, but we're still not guaranteed. So the problem when these flares of liver damage come up is we just don't know if it's due to the herb itself or to problems in the manufacturing, which is not well regulated. So I'll just leave that as an open question. I don't know, but yeah, ashwagandha, it improves functioning in the memory center, the hippocampus of the brain, and it improves memory and concentration. So it all lines up there. But in terms of I do have a preference to go away from medicines, away from herbs, and more towards natural things that, to me, it's almost like they're addressing the root cause of the illness. So like back to omega-3s, if we know that the brain is more dysfunctional, the symptoms are worse when you don't have these, and then you take them and you're better. It's like we've addressed a kind of a root cause there. The supplements I recommend most highly would be omega-3 NAC, that's N as in Nancy, N-acetylcysteine is the long name. And NAC is not wildly effective. It's kind of, the studies are half positive, half negative for depression. But what it does that I like is it seems to be good for health overall. It has some anti-aging properties and some other health benefits. One that I really like is it in animals, it protects the kidneys when they're on lithium. So the only real health risk we worry about on lithium is the kidneys. That's the serious one. And if we can do anything to help the kidneys, that's good for me. And I recommend the other one that I recommend is SAMe. That's, well, it's SAM as in Mary and then E. And this has been studied for about 40 years. It's not good for bipolar because it can trigger mania. It works a bit like an antidepressant, but it doesn't have all the side effects of antidepressants like sexual dysfunction. What's nice about SAMe is in the studies, it looks to be about as effective as an antidepressant. So it's not a mild effect, it's a serious effect. It seems to do no harm to the body. In fact, it does some good for the liver, and it helps pain conditions, helps sexual function. It just seems like a well-tolerated antidepressant that if they could copyright this thing, they probably would and sell it, but they can't. So you can't make money off it. So it's never going to be a medicine that's approved. And then lavender, that's an herb. So now we're dealing with an herb that could have risks, but lavender oil has strangely a really big effect in anxiety. And when I saw the research, I was like, that thing is almost twice as effective as antidepressants for anxiety. How can that be? But I gave it to people, and indeed, I saw many people get cured from anxiety who didn't respond to any medications. So I was convinced with my own eyes on that one.
But it sounds like what you're saying is we should start with these behavioral tools, sleep and exercise and that kind of thing, and then maybe along with that go into nutrition, and then come supplements and pharmaceuticals later down the road. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I want to also address something that's out there a lot on the internet. I forget the exact brand, but there's two brands, and there's these things out there called, I think they call them mega vitamins or something, but they're very popular for bipolar, depression, and ADHD. And I spoke with the woman who developed that research, and she really said that all this is doing is giving you a lot of the nutrients and vitamins that they're packed with about 24 nutrients and vitamins, these products, that you should have if you had a really healthy diet. And she recommended go to the healthy diet first, but she recognizes that a lot of people can't do that for whatever reason. They're not able to. And so then the vitamin would be the next best step. So don't feel ashamed if instead of eating salmon 2 days a week, which is the dose of omega-3 you need, you're taking omega-3 every day. Like, I don't have a particular bias one way or the other. Just get it the way you can. If you're not getting enough folate from your diet and you take methylfolate to treat depression, that's great. But I do, and probiotics, the same thing. If you want to take probiotics from a capsule, I think that's fine. If you want to eat kimchi and drink kefir and eat yogurt every day, that's fine too. Like, I think we can't say that one is better than the other. Both approaches seem to work. But I would start, if you're looking for supplements, I would look first to these supplements that basically correct the deficits in our Western diet while you're trying to change your diet along the way.
Yeah. That being said, let's talk about psychedelics. Recently, you've been researching the use of ketamine and psilocybin, and included some of that research in your updated version of your book that you recently released. I'd like to, learn about the use of these two substances.
Yes. So if you're looking for advances in psychiatry, I think all of us are pretty aware, it's been in the news a lot, that the big advances are psychedelics and the ketamines. And what these have in common is they have very powerful, strong effects, very rapid, within a week, sometimes a day. But on the other hand, we don't know as much about how long those effects last. So what is the good and bad of the ketamines and the psychedelics? And the psychedelics, frankly, are not FDA approved, although I think in Australia they're using some of them. And a lot of people are getting them outside of the medical system, I know. But the ketamine is approved in many countries and being used for depression. And not everybody considers ketamine a psychedelic, but many do. So, what is a psychedelic? Let's just lump them together and assume they're all psychedelics. A psychedelic is something that rapidly changes your mind, basically your way of perceiving and thinking. And when I say perception, I mean vision and hearing as well, and changes your experience. So, for many years, we were afraid of these, and we called them drugs of abuse. And we would I know growing up, I'd watch these TV made for TV shows where someone took it and they became psychotic, and it was very scary. And that can happen. So that fear is still real. But one thing we've learned from this psychedelic research is that wild hallucinations and dreamlike experiences are not necessarily bad. And I think that's a powerful lesson for psychiatry and for humanity is you can take a psychedelic and have a wild, disturbing, dreamlike experience. And it could be frightening and leave you with lingering anxiety. So there is a negative potential. Or it could open your mind to new ways of living and thinking that last for months, if not years to come. So that could go either way. And now, if we look to turn away from psychedelics and look at just get back to nature and look at human history, like, yeah, people have been doing things such as sweat lodges and trances and meditation and endless rhythmic dancing all night, things to induce these psychedelic states that are natural for thousands of years. People have been trying to enter spiritual states of mind. So spiritual healing is part of what we're all about, and we've ignored it too much in Western medicine. How does that change me? Well, if I notice my patient has no spiritual pursuits at all, whether it's creativity and music or nature, hiking, or gospel singing and Bible reading, if they have nothing going on, I'm going to pay attention to that and think, how can we add that into their life to encourage their healing from depression? And I've seen a lot of people recover from depression by turning on these spiritual aspects of their life that had fallen out. So you can do that. All I'm really saying here is that whether you do that through a religious retreat, through other rituals, or you do that by taking a psychedelic, it does have a powerful effect on depression. And we don't necessarily need the psychedelics to do that. The government in the US and many countries made psychedelics illegal around 1969. And what did we do? Well, after that, the people using psychedelics developed deep transcendental meditation to replace the drugs. So that worked well for many years too. So it is a rapid way to get there. It is a chemical way to get there, which has all the risks that chemicals have. So it's not for everybody. But don't think it's the be all and end all. What we're really discovering here is that spiritual experiences can treat depression if you make use of them. So just taking a psychedelic and then going about your day is not necessarily going to treat depression. All of these psychedelic studies, not all, but nearly all of them, were done with a psychotherapy attached to it. And the psychotherapy was there to help you capitalize on the new awareness in your life.
What about alcohol and caffeine? These are two questions in a way. Yeah, if you could talk about these, that would be helpful. Specifically caffeine, because I'm a little bit more confused about that, but alcohol as well.
Yeah, let's end with a good drink here. So, drinking to treat depression. What do we do there? Alcohol is just a substance around for many, many years. In the 1990s, it was started to be repackaged as a health drink. I was just at the grocery store and they had a brand of wine called Red Wine a Day was the brand. And the idea that, instead of an apple a day, you'd have red wine a day was packaged as a health thing because it did have some health benefits, and those are real, particularly with red wine. The problem is, just like a lot of things, like some of our medicines, it had some health risks. And in the last 20 years, we've become more attuned to those as we've had better research that's able to identify them. Mainly, it's cancer. So we're seeing a rise in cancer in people in their 30s, which is really frightening. And I don't think it's due to alcohol. It seems that changes in the environment and plastics and pesticides and chemicals and perfumes are what might be driving some of that. But alcohol certainly can cause a lot of cancer. And that's a big part of the sober curious movement, is really for your health. How much do you need to avoid to get healthy? I follow the British Surgeon General, who recommends no more than 3 drinks a week, have 1 day between each drink, so every other day, and have 3 glasses of water for every drink you have. So you're really spending a lot of time drinking the water and diluting it. And that seems to be the healthiest way to drink alcohol. So if you want a total up-to-date healthy alcohol advice, there it is. And that was a standard drink. Now, in terms of what alcohol does to you mentally, I think many of us know that, but it's not used as a psychedelic. One thing you might wonder here is, well, Dr. Aiken, if we're giving psilocybin and MDMA to enhance psychotherapy, how come when I showed up at my psychotherapist office drunk, they kicked me out? Can't we use alcohol to enhance psychotherapy? Well, alcohol just doesn't have those changes in mindset that are going to enhance psychotherapy. I think it has some positive changes, like it makes us more social, and that's a good positive thing. We get along better and promote group activity. There's a lot of speculation about that. An interesting difference is a study that looked at political beliefs, and when people drank, they became a bit more, you could say, authoritarian and kind of dictatorial and like my way or the highway and inflexible. I think we can all imagine that if we've been with drinkers. And when people took psychedelics, they became a bit more democratic and open and accepting of others. And it was a shift. So whichever one you think is good or bad, but that might cue you into why they're not using alcohol. They're using more psilocybin in psychotherapy. Because in psychotherapy, people do get better if they're more creative and open to new experiences. That's just a trait that is essential ingredient of getting the best out of psychotherapy. But back to caffeine. We're hearing all this conflicting research. Is coffee good or bad for your health? And I'll say, yeah, it does some good, it does some harm. Hey, if you got reflux, you probably shouldn't be drinking coffee. The thing about coffee is it's mostly just the caffeine there. There are a few other healthy ingredients like some flavonoids in there, kind of like dark chocolate has, but not as much. Not as much as tea. So to me, the big comparison is not caffeine or no caffeine, but coffee or tea. And the reason I say that is I am aware of no studies that suggest a major health risk with tea. The only one I could find is if you drink too much hot tea, you might burn your mouth, and that could damage your mouth and put you at risk for mouth cancer. Okay, so don't drink super hot tea. But when we talk about tea, we're talking about green and black tea, because these come from the tea leaf, the tea plant, not herbal tea. That's a separate thing. Like chamomile, it's like a flower. So let's talk about real tea. Tea has lots of other ingredients besides caffeine. One of them is theanine. Many of them I can't pronounce, that have mental benefits, improving in particular cognition and depression. So there's studies showing the more tea you drink, the less likely you are to get depressed. We see that with coffee as well, but only up to about 1 cup a day. After 1 cup a day, that's one mug a day, you get more depression and more problems. So coffee seems to have too much balance of risk and benefit, where I'm a kind of simple guy. I don't like to be having to exercise self-control all day long. Like, I would rather just drink as much tea as I want and feel good about it and know that I'm overall on balance helping. So coffee's going to raise your blood pressure. Tea has ingredients that lower your blood pressure, as well as the caffeine that raises it. So tea has less caffeine and it has other ingredients that balance it. So I'll leave you with one study that changed me on this. Is they gave people caffeine or matcha tea, that's a high intensity green tea, every day for a month or two. And they gave them these cognitive tests. And lo and behold, both of them helped about equally well. So taking a caffeine pill or taking matcha tea, they're both going to make you sharper. But what was amazing was after they stopped drinking it or taking the caffeine, only the matcha users continued to have cognitive benefits. And that's what I like. I'm more into long-term benefit, because we all know about short-term benefits. Often these are drugs of abuse, drugs that you get tolerance, you get withdrawal, they have problems. So tea did not have any withdrawal effect as they took it away, meaning it was doing something to the brain that was more long-lasting.
There do seem to be some benefits to mania, to bipolar disorder. We've kind of touched on them already. Creativity and being able to enter these spiritual experiences. But there's also great risks if you slip too far into mania and you get trapped in there. So I guess my question is, how can we get close to the edge, like get that benefit of more creativity and having that spiritual experience, but not fall into full blown mania. It might just be dancing with the devil. It might be too hard to do, but if you have any tips on how to increase creativity in spiritual experiences without the downsides, is that possible? Anything we could do?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And um, in a way, creativity goes down in mania. In some ways, what really goes down is the ability to edit. So, I'm a writer, and a lot of people talk about being a writer. Us writers get together. The one thing we all say is like, being a writer is really about cutting words, and it's the painful cutting. A famous writer said, "Kill your darlings." you just you're killing the things you love because you wrote this chapter and you think it's great, and you're like, no, it doesn't add anything, I got to cut it. So the ability to edit is a key part of being an artist, and that is what really falls away in mania. So how can you enhance the creativity of the highs? I don't know, to answer your question bluntly, I mean, I just don't know, because what the problem is, the closer you get to the edge, the more you lose awareness that you're near the edge. So the simple answer would be, well, just watch yourself closely. And as you get closer to the edge, you know your limits, just kind of, get some sleep or put on the dark glasses or take your lithium, whatever it is. But the problem is, I know that the more you get toward the edge, the more your self awareness goes down, the vicious cycle, and that's how mania gets triggered. So it is a magnet. It's a tough one. Um, but let's talk about how to enhance creativity outside of mania is brain health. I mean, exercise, Mediterranean style diet. We've talked about all that. I am touched by how many singer songwriters I've heard about and other artists who they develop their great creation after a good night of sleep. They wake up with these deep, wonderful dreams, and that inspires their scientific or artistic discovery. And we know that good quality sleep enhances creative thinking. So let's talk about if you don't sleep. If you don't sleep, you're going to be more limited in your repertoires. You're going to kind of depend on what's called rote knowledge. Like for a doctor, that means following the emergency 1, 2, 3, step 1, step 2, step 3 guidelines. So doctors might be good in emergency if they're sleep deprived because it's all very standardized guidelines, but they can't think outside the box and handle new situations and handle complex problems. So that's why doctors need sleep. Artists, of course, need sleep for the same reason. And they found people's creative thinking is better because creativity isn't just creating art, but creative problem solving. So you develop a problem in your life, you've got these conflicting demands from your family, your business, from the government, and you're like, oh, how do I resolve this? How do I make this work? And then bingo, it comes off. A light comes off. And you think, oh, I can do this. I can make that work. I can just change the work hours and make this work. So creative problem solving is going to be better if you sleep well as well.
Great. Thank you for all this fantastic knowledge and this time today. If people want to connect or learn more, you have a book, you have a podcast, you've got websites, you got all kinds of stuff. Where do you recommend people go?
Well, the Carlat podcast is really for professionals. So if you're of that mindset that you like to hear all the inner workings of psychiatry and how we come up with the treatments, that's where we lay it all out. But it might be boring to some. We do have a podcast that we ran called The Pocket Psychiatrist, keep us in your pocket, that goes over a lot of this more basic lifestyle stuff. And the website, Chris Aiken MD, is where I try to keep some useful information on there. I try to keep stuff that you can't get on other websites, like specific blue light glasses or omega-3 products to buy. So you get real specific directions on how to improve your mental health, the DIY stuff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aiken. I'm looking forward to digging into all of these fantastic little tips you gave us. And thank you for writing that book. It really helped me reframe all of these seemingly disparate things and put them all together for me. Thank you for simplifying all of this for all of us. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for today.
Thank you. I really appreciate those words, Michael.